This call is being have a plan to send out the link to this call after the call and give me a day or two. We are also thankful that the Equine Disease Communication Center is going to be hosting the recordings of these calls. First, it'll be a link, and then it'll be on their YouTube channel. So again, we thank the EDCC for collaboration with us on this National Equine Conference call. I also thank those coming on as speakers today. We have a very full agenda. And as always, I appreciate any suggested topics or speakers for this call. With that being said, our first speaker today is going to be Dr. Joe Fish with the Florida State Vet's Office, and he is going to give us an update on a toxic weed hay situation. So take it away.
All right, thanks, Katie.
Do you want me to share a screen, or do you?
I will share my screen in just a second. I have pretty pictures for everybody.
All right, let me give you permission. Hold on.
All right. Yeah, you got to keep me in check. Makes sense. But while we're setting that up, around December 28th, we got a call from a veterinarian that had come in and seen 20 out of 25 horses from a premises, and they had fever and they were stocking up, and really good diagnostics. They had run a CBC, a chemistry that were normal on. They ran it on 5 of them. They considered EVA, but didn't run that due to some other reasons. But they had just received a shipment of hay, and the 20 horses that were affected all got fed the same hay, and the 5 horses that went to another or got fed another type of hay did not show any of those clinical signs. So for that reason, EVA was considered but wasn't tested for. These horses had all of the 20 that were affected had fevers between 101 and 103, and had different clinical signs, from variations in how much they were stocking up to a couple of them had mild to one that also had severe laminitis. They noticed these signs within about 12 hours of the new hay being consumed, which is pretty standard with this weed. With that concern, we went out, and so part of the Florida Department of Agriculture, we have Agricultural Environmental Services, affectionately known as AES. They went out to the 2 places that were, sorry, let me rewind. In the following day, we had ancillary reports of over 500 horses being affected at a multiple different premises. So we reached out to those we were able to acquire and talk to, and they all reference back to 2 main distributors. So then AES went to those 2 distributors, and they immediately and voluntarily recalled the hay. And some of the people that were affected shipped some of that hay to Michigan State, and Michigan State was able to confirm that they had within the Timothy alfalfa was mixed in with Hori-Asalum, which matched all the clinical signs, and it was what the private practitioner, it was their highest on their differential diagnosis as well. So they did a really good job there already having the right diagnosis whenever they reached out to us. It was really good coordination to be able to get that pulled within 24 hours. And then I'm not sure about the process of whether they took back the hay that had not been consumed by other horses. I did not get involved in that. I would imagine that's probably standard practice for a business of that type, but I can't confirm whether that happened or not, or whether the owners just disposed of it and moved on. But these are pictures of it in a pasture, one that's kind of freshly picked. And then I do have a little bit more of that's like what the flower looks like in a fresh form, if you were to see it. Now, normally whenever they'll tell, or whenever you're reading, I did a little bit of reading in the interim. Note that the three main pictures are stolen straight from the University of Michigan's website. So thank you, University of Michigan, even though I didn't actually ask. And then the other is from the University of Florida. This one that I'll move around here is University of Florida specimen. So usually it takes a little bit more than just a few weeds. It's not like blister beetle that they just get a tiny little piece of. But there were definitely less amounts than what would have normally been documented in what was found. But that doesn't mean, you know, weeds can pop up in one spot and not the other, and then how it's baled. So that doesn't really scare me off of the diagnosis. Still a moderate found in those pieces of hay that were submitted, or flakes of hay that were submitted. So we were pretty comfortable with the diagnosis. Good work, and I guess that's really my report. Unless people have questions. I think Angela does have a question.
Mhm.
Just a comment, Joe. As soon as you put up the photo, I jumped up and I said, Horulissum. I don't know if you remember this, but we actually diagnosed Horulissum toxicity in the hay at the Miami Animal Import Center in horses just a couple of years back. So I think this is a really good example that this probably happens a little more frequently than we recognize and are talking about. We went through a lot of different hoops and hurdles to try to figure out what was going on at the time, but all of the clinical signs that you mentioned were the signs that we were seeing in imported horses through the Miami Animal Import Center for that period of time a few years ago. So this is really more common than I think we recognize, and it might be good to do more outreach to some of our industry partners and large facilities about the clinical signs, because they are a little bit unique. I mean, they're common things that occur in horses, but they don't usually occur all together, right? And in a large number of horses at the same time. So that's a really good trigger point. But it took us a really long time to figure this out before. So I'm so thrilled that you guys were able to figure it out much more quickly than we did a few years back. So great report. Thank you so much.
Joe, you have one question in the chat. What was the prognosis and outcome of the 20 head?
Hey, Katie, I think I lost my volume, or at least I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
No, I think it's my end though. But hey, if y'all can hear me, I can read lips. So yeah, I did want to that all the horses except for one recovered and one was euthanized due to laminitis, but everybody else recovered. So thank you.
Any other questions for Joe? You're going to have to put them in the chat so he can see them. Or You can say it and I'll put it in the chat. Any other questions? All right, thanks, Joe. Hearing none, we will move on to Julie Broadway. Oh, wait a minute, Joe, where was the hay from? Hold on, Julie.
The hay was from a Michigan distributor. Both of our places in the Palm Beach County area trace back to a Michigan distributor. The Michigan Department of Ag and that link was notified as well. That was done pretty early, and I would say even before, like within a day or two.
Okay. All right, Julie.
Thanks, Katie. Hi, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you about the new National Economic Impact Study for the U.S. horse industry. You may recall we did the last study in 2017. And so it's been a few years and we've been through a pandemic. So we were very eager to hear what the numbers look like. This is a 54-page report for the national level. So I'm not going to be able to go into all the details, but I'm going to share some highlights with you. I will also tell you that in addition to doing the national report, there were 6 states that commissioned reports, and those were North Carolina, Maryland, Texas, California, Florida, and New York. So if you're looking for a national economic impact study for, say, the state of Minnesota, there was not one done this time. So I unfortunately can't give you a whole lot of details. I can tell you the horse population in the state of Minnesota, but I can't tell you any more than that. Also this time we did 3 community studies. These are new studies, a new level of granularity than we've done in the past. We did Marion County, Florida. We did Long Island, New York, and Jacksboro, Texas. So we're excited about that. And we did 1 discipline study, and that's for harness racing. And that report will be out very shortly. We're still compiling that one. It's got a lot of data in it because harness racing's in a lot of states. So a lot of numbers to crunch there. So let me just give you the high level numbers. We are very pleased to report that in 2017, the total value added to the U.S. economy was $122 billion. But in 2023, reflected in our 2022 data that was collected for the study, we are at 177 billion. So we went up 55 billion in total value added to the economy. So that's a great story to tell. We also went up in the number of jobs. We went from 1.74 million jobs total to 2.2 million jobs total, which means salaries and wages also went up. So we're really happy about that. I will also tell you that we were not surprised, but we did discover that the total horse population has declined slightly. You will recall in 2017, we had 7.2 million horses in the US, according to that study. This time we are at 6.6 million horses total. And I thought just for fun, I would tell you that the largest horse populations across the country, of course, quarter horses, followed by thoroughbreds and paints are very close behind. Then we go to standardbreds next, and new in this year's study, because we didn't break this down to this level of granularity before, but mules and donkeys are 307,844. That was a really new number for us. And then it goes on to lower numbers from there. But it's a really good analysis, we feel like, of the total horse population this time around. And that's been proven, I think you guys know, looking back over the lifespan of horses, depending on which breed you're in. Some use 25 years, some use 30 years as their total life expectancy. But over that period of time, we have seen some declines in breeding. So we weren't totally shocked to see the total horse population sort of decline a little bit from there. I can also give you a couple of numbers, but let me begin by reminding you that when we do this analysis, and to make it consistent for comparison purposes with 2017, we break our data down into what we call the 5 sectors. Those are racing, competition, recreation, and traditional working horses. And often I get questions about traditional working horses. That is not broken out by a breed that we classify as a traditional working horse. That is broken out by their job. So if they are used in a dude ranch or in mounted police or in equine assisted services, they fall into the traditional working horse category. And then of course, our last category is other. And the reason we have that is because when we do this survey, many of the survey respondents don't identify their horses as fitting into one of the other sectors, so they pick other. So we have that breaking down here. So we've got employment in each of those sectors. We've got value added to the economy for each of those sectors. We've got the horse population for those sectors that are all contained within the report. So we're pretty pleased about that. I would also add one other thing that we love to tout about, which is we started in 2017 with a new statistic, which is the percentage of households in the US that are involved in and consider themselves to be a horse enthusiast. And that number is 39 million households contain a horse enthusiast. Now, the analysis proves that only 1.23% of those are people who own horses. Then 19.4% participate in horse activities but don't own horses. And then lastly, we have those that spectate but don't own or participate, and that's 9.85%. But we're very pleased to continue to see this number is strong and healthy. It tells us that there's a lot of interest in our industry and a lot of potential to expand upon the number of people that are engaged in our horse community. So I'm going to pause there for just a minute, Katie. And if anybody has questions about any of those, I'm happy to circle back. I will remind you that when you do an economic impact study, it is not a census. We don't go out and count them. This is based upon surveys that we conducted over the course of about 6 months. There were 20 surveys in total. Some were very specific. For example, we did a complete survey of equine assisted services. We did academia this time. We did a number of different specialty surveys this time. And then we had the main survey, which was the horse owner survey. And when we compile this data, there are 3 categories. There are what's called direct effects, there are indirect effects, and there are induced effects. And so I want to tell you what that means, because everybody doesn't quite understand this. A direct effect is when an economic activity occurs within the industry itself. So for us, a direct expenditure, including operating expenses or annual capital expenses, or employees that are used by horse farms or on tracks, those would be direct expenses. Indirect expenses are the effects of the direct expenses on the business sector. So the example that they like to give is the farmer who grows the alfalfa in the grain, as well as the mill that processes the grain, would be an indirect effect. And then you have what's called the induced impacts. And those result from the spending of labor income. So if you have a racetrack employee or a feed mill employee, and they're using their income to purchase consumer goods locally, those are called induced. And you add all those together to tell you the total economic impact. This is also not considered a marketing survey or any kind of marketing analysis, although we did do some additional questions this time, and they'll be coming out shortly in an appendices that we're preparing. So we asked some questions about people's spending habits and those kinds of things. So we're going to share some of that this time around, but that's not really the crux of what an economic impact study does. You do this so that you have some data and some facts and figures to help substantiate the contributions that our industry makes to the overall economy. And not uncommon, we use those when we go up on Capitol Hill, and states use them at the state legislature. And we even use them down to the local zoning boards to make our case when we're trying to influence something that's going on out there, either legislatively or regulatorily. There's all kinds of details like that in there. I will add that there are statistics in here this time on land preservation and on volunteerism. We've got a number of sectors that we did, like I said, specialty numbers that are here if you're interested, whether that's academia or any of the rescues and sanctuaries data. I am going to offer you the opportunity, you'll see some more about this, but on Monday, March the 4th, we are going to host sort of an online town hall or webinar, and we're calling it a data dump. And I'm going to spend a solid 30 minutes going through all this information, and we'll also be hearing from the results of our most recent equine welfare data study, which really drills down on the rescues and sanctuaries. So those are some of the highlights from the study that I thought I would share with you guys today. And I'm happy to take questions or to clarify. You can find the study on our website, and you can purchase a copy. We have provided a few copies to some of our sponsors for the study. It takes us about 2 years to do this entire process, and the national study cost us about $500,000 to do. So it's not a small effort by any stretch of the imagination. I will only add, Katie's well aware that we're continuing to focus on the Farm Bill. And one of our asks this time in the Farm Bill is to conduct a complete equine census across the country. You may be aware that when the USDA does its ag census, they have a very specific definition of how they count the horse population. And that means their number does not agree with ours. And we would really like to see them be more inclusive so they have a better understanding. And obviously, so we can get some additional government funding and assistance in all kinds of areas to help with herd health, whether that be biosecurity or disease mitigation or whatever else that might look like. Lots of things that are in that formula. So Katie, I'm going to pause there and see what questions anybody has.
Hi, folks. You can put your questions in the chat, or you can feel free to ask them. Julie, I've got one question that came in is, can you describe how your data, the 6.6 compares to the NAS numbers?
We have the NAS numbers are coming out, I believe, officially next week. So I don't know what that number is yet. I can tell you in the last NAS study, they claimed there were about 2.8 million horses. And we were still using the old number, the 7.2, but doesn't matter. 2.8 for them and 6.6 for us is a big deviation.
And then I've got another question that came in is, are there any highlights from this study that are provided on your website without having to purchase the entire survey?
There are some highlights, but we are in the process right now of designing some infographics, which would be a 1 or 2 page, really key numbers with some images to make them easy for people to digest. And we should have those out, we hope, in the next week or 2. As you guys can imagine, producing a 54-page report and then a similar report for 10 other breakouts has taken quite a bit of time to pull together.
Okay, I got another one, Julie. Is there a difference in the number of horses on a state basis between the 2017 and this survey?
Oh, that's a great question. I haven't compared state by state, but because we know the total population went down, we're going to see some changes there, I'm certain. But we continue to see the same 3 states at the top of the list that in population. That's, California, Texas, Florida. But we did see a few increases, adjustments in some states and a few declines in some other states.
Okay. Hold on, I'm looking, Julie. Give me one more second.
No. I will tell you that it's very interesting that when you compare the horse population by sector, Katie, you've got recreation by far is our biggest sector. 2.8 million horses probably in recreation. Racing and competition tend to be sort of neck and neck. They're about the 1 million, maybe slightly over 1 million mark of horses in each of those sectors. And then you go down from there. So 516,000 in the working horse sector and 855,000 in the other sector. We often think of those others as pasture ornaments that people don't know how to categorize to get up to that 6.6 million.
Oh, here's one more, Julie. For the racing and competition horse numbers, did you see any significant differences besides a decrease in the total number of horses?
Okay, so that's a complicated one to answer. And the reason for that is because we did see some declines, more so in racing than some of the other sectors. And we certainly saw more declines if we break it down by breed. We saw more declines in thoroughbreds specifically. We did see some increases in a couple of breeds. For example, I think I'm going to find my note here. I think I can honestly say we saw some increases in, where are they? Standard breds, Morgans, and I think there was one other that they discovered had some slight increases in recent years.
Those are all the questions I have, Julie. Let me just check the chat. I don't see anything in the chat. Any other questions for Julie and the American Horse Council on their survey? Julie, how often do you all plan to do this survey?
Well, we'd like to do it every 5 years, but again, because it is a huge undertaking, especially fundraising wise, not to mention time and talent, it's a little problematic to do that. We started, like I said, we did the last one in 2017. We were going to do it in 2022 because that would have been about the 5-year mark. But when you do it in 2022, you're asking the survey respondents to provide their data from 2021. And we knew coming out of the pandemic that maybe things hadn't quite recovered. So we decided we would put it off a year. So the 2023 is based on 2022 data that's supplied by the survey respondents. So we're going to kind of take a breath right now, Katie, and get through this one and then figure out if we can make it happen again in 5 more years.
Okay. Last call for questions. Last call for questions. Anybody with a question?
Well, if you were one of those that was kind enough to complete our survey, we'd like to say a big thank you. We really appreciate that. We had a little over, I think, 21,000 total respondents to the survey, which was great. And then we did, like I said, all those specialty surveys, which was a little extra work this time around. But we rely on this data. The industry relies on this data to help make our case in a number of areas. So it's important that people share with us, you know, kind of what it looks like.
And as Julie said, just because the question came up, the survey results report is located on their website at the American Horse Council. If you Google it, it actually comes up as the first thing. I just did it. So it does come up on their website for their economic report. Any other last comments, Julie?
I don't think so. By all means, feel free. You guys know me well enough. Drop me an email, jbroadway@horsecouncil.org if you've got a specific question. I do get questions from time to time, Katie, from people who are saying, I'm looking for a very specific, you know, kind of data point. Is it in there? And I'm happy to tell you if we've got it or we don't have it. But as I said, what comes out in the next, we're calling the appendix that we're making. It's got some new stuff in there that I think people will find interesting. That's a little more about spending habits, a little more about disciplines that people, whether we're more English or Western, and all those kinds of things that aren't included in the main report. So there's some new stuff in there.
Oh, I just got a question, Julie. If we want something included in the next economic survey, can we send it to you?
You can. I compile a list all the time of questions people want. Sometimes they are not economic impact, and so that has a little bit of a bearing on it. But you never know. I get calls constantly, folks, from venture capitalists and other industry suppliers who are thinking about maybe, you know, where they want to go with their market, and they look at this data to sort of see how, you know, how well the market's performing before they decide, you know, where they want to go, kind of thing.
Julie, here's a good question. If we purchase the main study, do we have access to the specialty surveys, or are those separate purchases?
I don't know the answer to that one yet. I'll have to look back and see. We worked with a firm called Innovation Group who specializes in doing economic impact studies. So I'll have to chat with them and see sort of what fallen in what category.
Hey. I don't see any others at this time.
Okay, fair
All
enough.
right, Julie, can you put your email address in the chat in case people have a question?
Sure.
And they can email you directly. That'll help for those that are going to listen to the recording as well. Okay, last call for questions.
Well, thank you again for your time.
Thanks, Julie. We appreciate it. All right, next up, we are going to get an update from the Georgia State Veterinarian's Office on an equine rabies case. Dr. Webster, I believe it's you.
Good day, everybody. Dr. Webster, Associate State Vet here. We got Jane Marie here, State Veterinarian. We're operating in stealth mode today. So we are present. I'm going to start off where we picked up with the case. Towards the end of last month, January 23rd, Athens Veterinary Diagnostic Lab reported rabies infection in an equine patient to the Georgia Department of Agriculture Animal Health Division by an official lab notification and a reportable animal disease form provided by the attending veterinarian at the University of Georgia Teaching Hospital. That same day, the referring veterinarian, initial vet on the case in the field, also reported the detection to GDA and provided case history that highlighted potential exposure risk to additional horses and humans. GDA reported the case to Georgia Department of Public Health for follow-up on potential human exposure risk to rabies. So a little background on the case itself. We have the affected horse is a 5-year-old paint gelding and has 6 herd mates. The herd has no history of rabies vaccination and have recently relocated to Georgia from another state. 3 weeks before onset of clinical signs, a skunk was observed near the horses. That was just something that the owner provided to the attendant vet just to give some additional support to the diagnosis, maybe potentially just getting all we can. Prior to presenting to the regularly attending veterinarian, the affected horse was handled and examined by the owners and friends, including a vet friend from out of state. At that time, the affected horse was presumed to have colic with anorexia, lethargy, dolomentation, and acute severe laminitis as the observed clinical signs. The regularly attending vet was called out a day and a half later after the owner and the friends looked at the horse and then examined that horse. On January 21st, the regularly attending veterinarian found the horse to have normal temp, pulse, respiration, and blood work was within normal limits. However, later that day, the affected horse developed acute neurologic signs, severe depression, and deep red gingiva with a toxic line. Also that evening, the affected horse arrived at UGA Large Animal Teaching Hospital and was exhibiting stuporous mentation, decreased tongue tone, facial hypersensitivity, nystagmus, mucous membranes with petechial hemorrhage, elevated heart rate, and recumbency. Unfortunately, the horse went down when trying to unload from the trailer with sling assistance that was not successful, and the horse was then euthanized and tested for rabies. So later on in the week, public health officials informed GDA that potential exposed humans were contacted and advised a 6-month confinement period for the 6 herd mates that were remaining. So some take homes when talking with the attending veterinarian were client communication. We had a really good conversation about when and how to dive deeper into vaccination histories, when to get specific, when asking for those things in the field, especially with clients who I coined myself, since I still practice, special concern clients that may have, temperament issues or stressed, trying to get to the most specific information in those cases. The other take home was the public health risk with any horse that's presenting with, clinical signs that are general, that rabies should be in the back of your mind. I'll take any questions or comments at this time.
Dr. Webster, can you repeat back when the horse first showed signs of colic and then when it started going acutely neuro?
That was on the 21st. And so, it started on the 19th.
Okay.
And then the vet was called out and went out on the 21st. So it really went down on the 21st. So about 2 days.
Okay. The other question that I've received is what is the 6-month confinement parameters, and are they under quarantine, those exposed horses or herd mates?
Well, that we did consult with the Department of Public Health, who are the regulatory officials over rabies in the state of Georgia. So confinement is different from a regulatory quarantine. We assist the Department of Public Health with quarantines when requested. That is where we will go out and stipulate parameters of an official quarantine and a timeline for that quarantine. In this case, the Department of Public Health pursued the confinement route and are going along those lines.
Okay, so no quarantine is what I'm understanding.
Yes,
And
ma'am.
then we got 2 other questions here. Are the herd mates being or were required to be vaccinated after the confirmation?
Why?
Oh, I heard someone. They weren't required to, but she did pursue that with the owner. The attending veterinarian did.
She did discuss it, is that what you said? Sorry.
Discussed it and performed it.
Oh, did perform, okay. And then the other question is, were any humans given post-exposure prophylaxis?
That I do not have the data on, especially since they are the majority of them are out of state. So public health did reach out to them, and but I don't have that information.
And does Georgia have any requirements or recommendations for rabies vaccination in horses?
Rabies vaccination is recommended, but is not a requirement. And we do follow the Georgia rabies control manual when speaking with clients about rabies, because rabies is everywhere pretty much. So it is highly recommended, but it is not a requirement.
Okay, I do not have any more in questions here. Anybody else have any other questions or concerns for this rabies case? Last call. We got one more message. Hold on. At this point in time, there are no states on the call. Are there any states on the call that may have a rabies requirement for vaccination? If so, can you just put it in the comment section or the chat, sorry. And the question came in as far as required vaccination for USHA or AAP. USHA does not have any recommendations regarding vaccination from the Committee on Equine that I'm aware of. And then AAP, I would have to go back and check. I believe they are under the recommended, but not under the core, but I don't have that off the top of my head. Anybody else know? There is also a note that was HISA does require rabies vaccination for all covered horses. Thank you for providing that. And thank you, Chrissy, for saying rabies is a core vaccine for AAP.
Correct.
In Virginia, rabies vaccination is required for dogs and cats and only recommended for livestock. So thank you, folks, for providing that. Any additional questions, comments? Okay, well, thank you, stealth mode, Georgia folks, Dr.
Yes,
Webster and Dr. Hannibal. Appreciate your time and update on this case. Very much appreciated.
You're welcome.
So at this time, I because I get the liberty of running the call, I was also asked to give you all an update on a recent USEF, United States Equestrian Federation discussion we had on biosecurity. We at our annual meeting recently in Louisville in January did host a biosecurity session where I went through a EHV outbreak, a neurologic horse. It started with a neurologic horse at a showgrounds. And we had the group discuss how they would respond. And each table was either a table of veterinarians or acting as a veterinarian or acting as a competition manager or acting as a trainer or acting as a communication specialist. And they were to determine how they would proceed in the event that they now have been made aware of a recumbent horse suspected of having equine herpes, myeloencephalopathy. And the reason I bring this up is, number one, I was asked to bring this up to the group in case folks are interested, because this is on our website for the USEF. And I'm going to share my screen now just so folks can see. So this does, our website does have the video presentations. And if you click on the annual meeting video presentations, the one on biosecurity will walk you through this scenario that I just discussed. And basically the scenario is 10 barns and one barn in the middle has the neurologic horse. And we discuss how you would manage it, from isolating that horse to what are the prevention measures that can be taken when you do suspect a neurologic horse. So for those of you that are interested, I would strongly recommend you visiting our website and looking at this video. It does give you all of the discussion points that were had during the session. I will say there are some highlights that came from it. There was a big discussion for the importance of temperature taking at a horse show and reporting those temperatures as the first clinical sign. A lot of cases, when you get a neurologic horse, there's been a febrile horse somewhere within that barn previously, knowing that the virus is circulating. So temperature and removal of those horses into isolation. The other thing that came up is the discussion point about isolation, what's appropriate, where is it appropriately to isolate these horses? And then how do you determine who's been exposed and some of the risk factors at a horse show grounds? looking at all the people or things that have touched that affected horse. Some of the things that will be dependent upon the breeds and disciplines that we talked about would be if there's breeders involved that go from barn to barn, from trainer to trainer, and breed multiple horses. The allied professionals, whether it's a farrier, the chiropractor, the massage therapist, all of those folks that handle the horses on a daily basis on the showgrounds, and how to identify those and how to know who's touched those horses. And then obviously looking at what are some of the shared risk factors, such as shared equipment or the nose rags or communal water of that sort. We also talked about testing and looking at some of the new technologies that are out there. Obviously, we are looking at the stall side test that hasn't been USDA approved yet, but it is available through the Fluxergy system, is one of them that is looking at a stall side detection of EHV to give us that quicker results. And again, those samples would be going to a regulatory or a state lab that could confirm those sample results. And again, understanding that it typically happens on a Friday afternoon or a Saturday when no labs are open. So how do you handle it in the meantime when you don't have a lab result? And again, looking at the use of these type of tests that are being developed. So we did have that discussion. We also discussed, from a regulatory standpoint, in some cases, respiratory cases are reportable and regulated for EHV, whereas others, it might just be the neurologic case and getting the state veterinarian's office involved early on in the incident. So we at USEF are working on some outreach videos with the focus of what are some of the biosecurity steps to be taken. We're working on looking at focusing on temperature taking and the critical nature of that. We do understand the time it takes and the safety issues on some of this. So here at USEF, we are proponents of the biothermal microchip, as that will be an easier, safe method for quickly taking temperatures on a group of horses, understanding that it can be a slightly variable from the rectal thermometer. And if you do have a questionable biothermal reading, that you can always confirm with the rectal thermometer. So those are just some of the highlights that came from that discussion. We are urging our competition facilities to have these discussions in advance so that they know when there is an outbreak, they can react and respond quickly and efficiently. So knowing who the responsible parties are is a critical control point, meaning who is going to set up that isolation, who is responsible for receiving the sick horse report, and who is responsible for caring for those horses while they're in isolation. Figuring that out in advance is going to help you respond quickly and efficiently to the incident at the showgrounds. So USEF, from our perspective, we do have a requirement for isolation stalls, specifically those events that are more than 10 days. Those horses on those grounds will have, we will require those facilities and those competitions to have on-site isolation stabling, because if you are keeping horses on the grounds for more than 10 days, you're going through at least 1 to 2 incubation periods. If you're bringing a sick horse onto the grounds, they have potential to spread within that grounds. So by making sure that we have isolation on site, that we can make sure we have adequate isolation for the needs if this was to spread throughout the showgrounds. With that being said, a lot of facilities refer to a veterinary clinic in their isolation plans, or that's what they think they're going to do. And then when push comes to shove, the isolation plan doesn't work because the veterinary clinic does not have adequate isolation stabling, or it's full due to other diseases in the area. So again, looking at how to isolate if the veterinary clinics are full or cannot take horses from showgrounds. That's where it becomes critical to make sure there's something on site or can be addressed at the time. The question that is posed is isolation stalls, how many? Our isolation stall requirement for USEF is 1% or 10 stalls if you have more than 1,000 horses on the grounds. And again, that's the requirement for horse shows that are longer than 10 days, or the stabling horses are stabled longer than 10 days. So that's our general rule. That's one that we've been going by. However, we're looking at evaluating what are the needs based on some of these outbreaks and how many exposed horses that are identified. It's also important to understand that each showgrounds has unique risks. And that's something that we're looking at now from a USEF standpoint, is what are some of those risk factors and how do we quantitate that risk? So I'm looking at working with the University of Kentucky and folks on a risk assessment tool to determine how we can evaluate specifically the risks at a horse show grounds versus a home barn facility. So in a nutshell, that is what we're working on here at USEF. Is next month you'll see some video, or at the end of this month, you'll see some biosecurity videos for biosecurity before the show, during the show, and after the show. We've also filmed and in the process of editing a video on how to set up an isolation area and how to implement an isolation plan during an outbreak. And in the coming months, we will also have a video on how to take a temperature and how to properly clean and disinfect. So that's the efforts we're doing and accompanying the messages and the issues that were raised during the USEF annual meeting. With that being said, I think I've covered all the points that were associated with the biosecurity talk. I'm more than happy to answer any questions, or if you have any questions for our speakers that may still be on the line. We have a couple minutes. The one thing I will note at the end of this call is the fact that our March call had to be moved up. We had to do a date change, so it will be the first Thursday. It'll be March 7th rather than the 14th. Anyone else have any questions, comments, or concerns? Happy to answer. Give everybody a minute. And again, our next call will be March 7th. If you have any topics, please feel free to share them with me or suggestions for speakers. And hopefully we will get this recording out to you in the coming days. All right, hearing none, I'm going to say thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day, and I'll look forward to talking to you all again in March.
Thanks, Katie.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.